I have a love for all people. One of the challenges that I'm having is that I came to Rockland County over 30 years ago so that my children could go to school. In when 2006 and to 8, there were people closing up our schools, taking over, said they were going to take over the Ramapo district. And now we don't even have a place to live for people with low incomes like I have. Because I tried to get in one of the buildings down on Livingston's side, and I was turned away. I was told that I was not allowed to come in there. The little boy said, my mommy's in charge. When they found out who I was turned away. Where do I go for those home rentals? I need some place to do what I need to do to be a living human being in this society, whether I'm handicapped or not. I need low income, and everything is being bought up and taken over by people who are building these massive buildings and letting no one else in. I can't even find an office to go to even apply for housing. That's not right. Every time I'm always told that we're not allowed fair housing. Why not? Where is it going? If everybody else is taking up these housing, where are we supposed to go? That's all I have.
Chatham. I'm the community relations manager for Wadomi, as well as the coordinator for RAB of Westchester. And we are an organization that encourages people to go, specifically people with disabilities, to go vote. And that's why we're having this event today. And so now we're going to pass things over to Maria Samuels, who is our executive director, and she will introduce our first candidate.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Maria Samuels. I'm the Executive Director of Westchester Disabled on the Move. This is very important to the disability community because we do need to get out the vote. But first, I just need to inform you that we do not support or endorse any political candidates. We are nonpartisan and non-political. We present this event as an opportunity to educate and encourage voter engagement. Any statement made by the political candidate does not constitute agreement or endorsement of any views or opinions by us. Our first guest is Mr. Mondaire Jones. The first one I'm going to ask you is about affordable, accessible housing in the district that you're running for. This is a real situation and a crisis for people with disabilities. Not only getting affordable housing, but also accessible affordable housing. How do you plan to address that when you and if you get the seat?
I so appreciate the question, and those of you who are familiar with my biography, such as the one that was just read, know that this issue is personal for me. I grew up in Section 8 housing and on food stamps, and my young single mom still had to work multiple jobs just to provide for our family. So I am intimately familiar with how difficult it is to survive in this extremely expensive place to live here in Westchester. And of course, the other part of the district is Rockland. I believe that housing needs to be affordable for everybody, especially in our district. 40% of households in Westchester qualify as, quote, cost burdened. It means that they pay more than 30% of their income towards housing costs. And of course, this is particularly acute as a problem for households with people with disabilities. And so we need to build more affordable housing in our district, and we need to center people with disabilities in our housing policy. That means that we have to pass legislation to codify a regulation that unfortunately the Republican president Donald Trump has since withdrawn. It was a policy under the Obama administration in 2015 under HUD called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. And it requires jurisdictions to analyze housing patterns of segregation. and to ensure that disability is included as a protected class. This means that municipalities receiving federal dollars are required to undertake an analysis, an assessment of patterns of segregation in their municipalities, including on the basis of disability, and to affirmatively offer a proposal to desegregate housing patterns. And of course, Congress has to go further than that. It has to affirmatively provide funding for home modifications for people with disabilities. Short of that, it should make affordable home modifications tax deductible at a very minimum in order to increase access.
We're moving on now to Michael Parietti. He's from the SAM Party. Mike Parietti was running on the Serve America Movement Party line, row 8. Welcome, Mr. Parietti. Thank you for joining us. I know, again, it was short notice, and we really do appreciate this, that you responded and that you're here, okay? The first one has to do with affordable, accessible housing. As you know, affordable housing is difficult to find in Westchester County. Affordable and accessible counties, even far more difficult to find. This has been an ongoing problem which Wadomi has worked with, and the demand gets greater and greater, especially after the pandemic issues where people are facing homelessness at a greater rate. What do you see as a possible solution that you could work on if and when elected?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm well aware of the fact that there is a shortage of affordable and accessible housing for people who need it in Westchester and Rockland County. And I would just back up the federal requirement that if there's federal dollars going to a project, that there must be a proportionate amount of affordable and accessible housing in every project. Beyond that, I have a very personal experience with this issue because I've been involved in local politics at the grassroots level for about 18 years in Rockland County. And we have a very severe problem with it, not only the shortage of accessible and affordable housing, but also housing discrimination. And we have a lot of segregated housing in areas of Rockland, in particular Ramapo and Spring Valley. And the political dynamics behind this are interesting, and it has to do with the fact that the Hasidic community has very effectively organized themselves into a voting bloc, which gives them tremendous political clout. And they use that clout, the ability to determine the outcome of these elections at the local level, to gain tremendous leverage over municipalities. And they use that leverage to often stack the planning and zoning boards with people that are in sympathy with the needs of their community, but not necessarily everyone else. And so you have that what tends to happen is they tend to favor approving high density developments that are tailor-made to the needs of the Hasidic community, but not necessarily to the larger community. And when they're going through the development process, they say that, oh, they're going to be open to everybody in the community. Don't worry about it. But when these buildings are built, almost without exception, the only people that are allowed to move in are members of a certain Hasidic sect or community. And this is blatant and it is obvious. And this is going on in communities of color down in Spring Valley. They're building these nice, big, beautiful state-of-the-art buildings. And when they're finished and people are moved in, anyone from outside the community is prevented from moving in. And so it doesn't matter if it may be accessible and affordable, but it's only for certain communities. So what I would do is I think that the federal HUD should be more aggressive in monitoring these kinds of situations. And I would be in favor of appointing, they should be empowered to appoint monitors and people that would mediate the situation in terms of these. If a municipality has a pattern of building housing that's accessible that's available to one community over others, then a monitor should be put in place to ensure that doesn't happen. And they should also be able to monitor the process of people applying for units in these buildings and then being allowed to move in. Because it's a very serious problem. It's causing a very rapid demographic shift. We're having tremendous amounts of segregated housing and this needs to be rectified. I would be focused on that. I think one thing you'll see is that I'm not afraid to talk about this issue If you look at the three candidates before me, they're all well aware of this issue. It's the elephant in the room, but they're afraid to take it on. Okay, partly because they don't want to offend the leaders of that community, and they may be hoping to get the Hasidic bloc vote in the election. I'm never going to get that vote. I am not afraid to talk about this. I will confront this issue head on if elected to Congress.
Okay, thank you. My last question is, what is the most pressing challenge now faced by people with disabilities, and how do you plan to address it? So it's sort of a hard question.
You know, it's hard to just pick one because we know that disability issues truly are intersectional with every other issue. I will say, however, that healthcare is a fundamental human right that has to be guaranteed to everyone. It's why I support the Medicare for All Act, which would guarantee healthcare to all Americans as a human right, without premiums, deductibles, or copays, and it's going to cap the annual cost of prescription drugs at $200 per person. I also don't think that people should lose their health care simply because they've lost a job or changed their job. And Medicare for All would ensure that that would no longer have to be a negative experience that people have. This is the only proposal that would bring down our ridiculously high systemic costs, eliminate barriers to treatment like premiums, deductibles, and copays, and ensure that everyone is covered and can see their doctor regardless of their employment status or economic means. There's currently serious issues surrounding who pays for durable medical equipment and complex rehabilitative equipment and how that's delivered. And so Medicare for All will help to solve this problem as well. I want people to know. While Medicare for All obviously would be a huge step forward, right now we also need to be guarding against steps backward, especially given yesterday's confirmation of what will be a sixth justice to the very conservative majority on the Supreme Court that will strike down the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. It is unconscionable what's going on, and I'm working really hard in providing and offering the kind of leadership that would be a guard against those kinds of really draconian, inhumane activities by the Supreme Court. The ACA, which I'm fighting to protect, has provided protections to people with disabilities, like a ban on discrimination against people with pre-existing conditions. That's something that Republicans in Congress and Republicans running for Congress, unfortunately, right here in this district, would do. They would vote to take away the Affordable Care Act. And we have to make sure we are fighting tooth and nail to protect the victories that we've already won. And so I'm really excited to get to work after November 3rd, and I certainly hope to have your support in this election.
What is the most pressing challenge now faced by people with disabilities, and how do you plan to address it?
Well, I think the biggest challenge faced by people with disabilities is making sure they get their fair share of resources. So I think I'm very focused on making sure they get their fair share. That's one of the reasons I'm opposed to Medicare for All, because I see Medicare for All as a Medicare free for all, in which people, our most vulnerable populations, our senior citizens and our disabled and our elderly, are going to be forced to compete with perfectly healthy, able-bodied people for finite medical resources. And who do you think is going to win that competition? It's not going to be the senior citizens. It's not going to be the disabled. So I'm against Medicare for All because I think it would overtax the system, push it to the limit, and there would be shortfalls. And I believe that the disabled and the elderly would be the ones that would lose out. I think we have to recognize the fact that healthcare is a very expensive undertaking, and that it's resource intensive, it's labor intensive, it's material intensive, and it's infrastructure intensive. So we need to have a system where we get universal coverage, but people are required to pay into the system what they can, particularly able-bodied people who can work, to support the overall system. And I think that the Affordable Care Act was a good faith effort to make that happen. And I think we should do what we have to do to make it viable, if we have to help evolve it or change it or modify it. But I think we need to keep that in place and make it viable to make sure that everyone is covered, in particular people with disabilities. I know that in Rockland County, again, we have a big problem where politically powerful groups tend to overutilize some of these benefits. Like the Hasidic community has a very high utilization of Medicaid. And I feel I've knocked on many doors, thousands of doors over the 18 years I've been involved in this. I've talked to a lot of people. And I've talked to people that to me were clearly disabled, that told me that they went and tried to get benefits or aid, that they were evaluated and turned away or reevaluated and then had the money taken away and forced to pay it back. I want to make sure that people get what they deserve and what they require. And it should not come down to which group is more politically powerful than the other. So what I would do, I would want to do an audit of the entire system. Let's look at where the money is going, what needs are being met. And if certain communities are getting a disproportionately high number of resources for disability or other things, that we should take a look at that and say, does that really make sense? And if it doesn't, then we need to reallocate the aid and make sure that people who really need it are getting it. So I think that's the biggest challenge facing people with disabilities, is making sure that there are people who will ensure that they get their fair share of resources and are not pushed aside by more politically powerful or better organized groups.